Hello and very welcome to hot episode of Heidegger 1717, and we have now entered into the where does the picture of the inner originally stem from, the very origin of it. Our picture is not coming from nowhere. The picture has its starting point somewhere. What was the role of this picture in the language game? What was it there out? What was it set out to do? It's important to understand the beginning of the picture. How it originally formed. It has a sort of background. And of course this background is not what one would say substantial in the normal sense. But there are some hints, there are some very subtle indications of something going on. None of these hints are decisive. They're more suggestive, enticing. Indicative, maybe it's the right word. Or suggestive. I think what I read last is so pertinent, so absolutely excellently indicative. I'll take the liberty to reread it. The characteristic, and it's from page 167. The characteristic of the mental seems to be that one has to guess at it according to the outer in others, and knows it only in one's own case. But when, through more careful thought, this opinion goes up in smoke, what turns out to be the case is not that the inner is something outer, but that inner and outer no longer qualify as types of evidence. Inner evidence means nothing, and neither does outer evidence. In the preceding chapters, we have criticized the conception of the inner as a mysterious, hidden entity. In particular, we have emphasized the link between the inner and the outer. For talk of inner states only makes sense where there are outward criteria for those states. Having made these points, several important questions remain. For if the inner outer picture is so confusing, why do we use it? The picture cannot simply be dismissed as misleading, for reference to it is part of the grammar of our psychological concepts. Thus, until we can clarify its significance, our account is lacking a fundamental element. A second, and I think this is rather well worth to point some attention to. A second difficulty related to this one is the clash between Wittgenstein's attempt to demystify the inner and our sense that it is genuinely mysterious. Even people we know well may suddenly act in ways which makes us feel we don't really know them at all. Similarly, in the midst of everyday activity, we may suddenly be struck by the otherness of other people and wonder at the simple fact that there are consciousnesses other than our own. On such occasions, the idea that the inner is hidden seems an undeniable truth. Indeed, insofar as we are often uncertain what others are thinking or feeling, we might well be said to experience the hiddenness of the inner every day. So what would we make of this? Is the inner hidden? And if so, in what sense? And of course, the crux here is our uncertainty in knowing what others are pertaining or intending to do. What are their aims? What do they struggle for? Their sudden and spontaneous change of direction, opinion. What they're striving for, and I would say even more difficult things like hope, wanting, belief. It's an enormous hidden reservoir of discloseness or closeness, closure. There's even a sense that these are things that we can never know for true. That these things will always be cut off from our understanding. And here are some hints. The asymmetry according to Wittgenstein, and this is things that's been brought to the discussion earlier on. But the asymmetry is caused by grammatical features, not a true hiddenness or innerness. said last time, it's because the first person perspective has a different history. That history is sort of connected to that one person. It doesn't have to be through engravings in the memory bank or anything even slightly similar to that. It is just what it is. Coming from a different place might be a very apt way of describing it. That means that that person's beliefs are better informed of natural reasons. Whereas the third person perspective is secluded, cut off from experience of the other, of precisely the same reasons. And in reality, it is not the slightest aspect of oddity in all this. It's absolutely natural from the circumstances. It's another quote on rather a bit down on page 168. The inner is hidden from us means that it is hidden from us in the sense that it is not hidden from him. And it is not hidden from the owner in the sense that he gives expression to it. And we, under certain conditions, believe his expression, and their error has no place. And this asymmetry in the game is expressed in the sentence that the inner is hidden from other people. The point is not, listen to this. The point is not that the individual sees something only she can see, but we treat her as a subject, and on the basis of her utterances ascribe to her particular thoughts, feelings, and experiences. The asymmetry of our psychological concepts is not a metaphysical truth, but is simply the reflection of a language game based on the notion of a subject whose utterances are treated as necessarily correct. This, and here it comes, this is one of the reasons why the hiddenness idea could sort of take that turn as ending up in establishing some sort of idea of an inner origin. This may make the notion of the subject seem unduly arbitrary, and one might object that the language game must have some connection with reality. But to a certain extent, Wittgenstein does not deny this. Although grammar does not express any truths, our language games operates against a particular background. And if certain things were different, the language game would become impossible or lose its point. So part of the problem, if you like, is that all these structures that we take for being facts or germinate status of what the psyche expresses, these are all coming from the doings, the grammar that is already out there, so to speak. And we mentioned those tendencies before. They are because outer criteria is an absolute necessity for construction of any rules whatsoever. So instead of suggesting can be, instead of looking for a arche or a substance in the innerness, or an arche and atomistic idea in the outerness, it is more down to the corollaries, the action, the intentions. If I ask somebody what she is thinking, I don't want her to do a massive introspection to look at those pages of her innerness that are causative of her actions and are part of the essence that is her. This is a helper. This chapter is especially good because it gives some vague descriptions or hints, sketch out as of what could have caused the picture from the very beginning, giving pointers to, here that thing could be seen as that instead of this. And the interesting thing is, of course, once it's started, it will continue to go in that direction. Once there's an establishment of an innerness, the outer will also become more fixated. I think this is one good reason for what happened in Asia Minor when the philosophers of nature start looking for the arche of everything. What is the starting point? The building blocks, but they are always hidden. And so that is pretty much taking a very decisive step in the direction of not seeing corollaries, what's happening out there, as absolutely important, crucial. Something that one can not be without. Inferring the understanding of grammar as the antidote to this. Will soften up the concepts. Make them much less fixed with the innerness. And it's also part and parcel of what it is to be an individual. A hiddenness, as it's been called here, in the confusion that emerges when the picture captivates us, reduces the individual to a sort of closed off passivity. Listen to this. This is absolutely the reason why we have individuals. It is not something extra or add-on. Page 169, about 30 lines down. Similarly, if others could generally predict the individual's actions better than she could. The notion of the individual as an agent with particular intentions, etc., would be undermined. And I most definitely agree here. Rather, our whole relation to our own body is different. Generally, yeah, this might seem self-evident and unnecessary to mention, but it is still very important. Generally, the individual does not observe her own body and is not surprised by its actions. Similarly, when she expresses an intention, this has a different kind of basis from predictions about how others will act. Here, she needs no evidence for her statement, but simply says what she intends to do. That's it. Not more complex than that. A statement is not so much as, listen now, it's not so much as a prediction as a commitment to seek a certain goal. I think that quite successfully can be compared to having an attitude towards. Having an attitude towards is not something that can be true or false. It's actually nonsensical. To even assume a sort of proposition-like feature of having an attitude towards. You have it, and that's it, and that changes everything. that is also what it is to be an individual. It's not an extra feature of archaeas that are already established, or innerness, like a sort of golem or man-made man of clay in which you put a soul. No, it's much more down to the basics than that. And compare this to, by contrast, when someone else predicts what another will do, this is a genuine prediction based on an extrapolation either of the individual's previous behavior or that of people in general. These points show how our subject-based language game requires a certain setting if it is to make sense. It would be wrong, however, to treat these background facts as determining our grammar. For it would be possible to construct a different grammar against the background of precisely the same facts. That's a very important indication as well. There's no absolute necessary connection to what could be out there and how the language game evolves, develops. Questioning this deterministic idea of the innerness as completely decisive and leaves humans only to be the deterministic, most possibly statistical outcome of those dispositions cut in stone. That somehow is attached to the innerness of each person. And we assume that innerness because we do not have access to those people's inner. We don't understand their actions. We get shocked, surprised, and all of a sudden the idea of the black box is established. And I say from that moment on, everything takes a different turn. Once that idea settled or that picture is well established, we also need to start with the hiddenness of the outside world. So there is a deep connection between the hiddenness of the inner and the opacity of the outer, that it cannot readily be understood. And then later on, maybe empiricism and scientific thinking further strengthen that idea by claiming it's only with the device of scientific methods we can open up the opacity of the outer. Someone who went into the other direction, in contrast to the physicos of Microasia, was Heraclitus. And a lot of what you can read off from the fragments is a sort of almost Wittgensteinian close look into these subjects, looking for clarity. Before things gets established and out of vision. Pause here. Thank you very much. Let's see here. So we continue where we left off. This hidden cloud, if you like, is not a hiddenness at all. It's a side effects or natural cause of how things are put together. There is a site here on 171. Can one know what is going on in another person in the way he himself knows it? How then does he know it? He can express his experience. A doubt in him as to whether he really has this experience, analogous to the doubt as to whether he has such and such a disease, does not enter into the game. And for that reason it is wrong to say that he knows what he experiences. But the other can, of course, doubt whether this person has the experience. So doubt enters into the game. But for that very same reason, it is also possible for there to be complete certainty. So the first person doesn't investigate his innerness, her innerness. In the conclusions there are no doubt. Doubt, epistemologically investigating, introspection, sort of reading off the hidden lexicon of the innerness. Is simply not a part of the process, not in that going into the innerness to see who one is. It's a rule breaking to think that you can go into it. And by doing so, disclose, reveal understanding. See the same tendency on the other side of the rope, where we usually place the outer physical world. And physikos, to call it the physical world, is very apt. It has deep connections with this captivity of the picture, I'd say, that leads to the arche. Establishment of the physical world is far from easy to look into. Ian McGilchrist, in his enormously big book, The Matter with Things, has really done a good job as a first try out. One interesting thing he says in the book is reductionism is based on the false assumption that the outer world is extraordinary simplistic. So it sounds very similar to Johnston's The Complexity of the Inner. To be understood as it is far from a simple thing, that of matter. In the whole series we've been trying to soften up a lot of the hard corners of the ideas or the picture of the outer world. Identity would definitely be there, that each little particle in the atomistic universe has its very own identity. And all those features of the outer world are springing from the original misunderstanding, the original captivity of the picture is almost as a big bang. And where everything goes into a sort of fixed state. And identity is one of those aspects of fixatedness that evolved since the picture established it. And in sloppy, compulsive thinking, in the same way, we think too quickly, therefore we cannot enter into the possibility of understanding these things. Still with the physikos, there was, I would say, still not a complete establishment that identity was there, whatever identity is. But it's most definitely a locking part of the whole thing. And all the locks goes in at the very same time. And after they've gone into place, they need to be addressed all at once. Otherwise, there will always be one openness that is still not decided. And that lockedness will enter into that openness and lock it up. The hiddenness is the start. Hiddenness is identity, I would say. It's another word for hiddenness, identity, to say that two things are identical. It's almost like a warning sign. Here ends common road, don't go any further. Do not venture in and bring understanding to these matters. Instead, identity comes into the play. And once you have identity, you have the atoms, and that could give you also space. Because the identical based space is the Newtonian space, based on the hiddenness. And I think Newton called those hiddennesses as kernels of rice, all identical, and they could be placed in equidistance to each other. So the distances also had the quality of some sort of identity. All the centimeters were similar. So you see here, that could also go into mathematics to say all the distances between all the numbers are the same somehow. And it becomes a hiddenness. Edward de Bono brought sameness to the fore, because if you say or think or perceive something as same, that is the very moment that you stop looking further or more down. Something has entered into the similarity slot, so to speak, and no more action is taken after that. Similarity slot is close to the inner outer. As soon as you say inner, the buck stops here. It will go no further. It will say, instead of investigating or going into it or enter into it, whatever you like, it will just stop and we say it's inner, or think it's inner. So it's a sort of a stopper. And here's a transcription of how Wittgenstein would express that when the misunderstanding evolves and establishes itself. For example, the individual's grammatical role of subject, when combined with the fact that others can't predict what she is thinking or feeling, may be expressed in the metaphysical claim that a man's thinking goes on within his consciousness in seclusion, in comparison with which any physical seclusion is a form of openness. The idea of seclusion here is misleading, for it suggests that there is some hidden entity where none in fact exists. It would be like saying that someone who talks in a language we do not understand is hiding something. Certainly we cannot understand her message, but this is not because she is being secretive. Imagine there was a group of people who continually revealed their deepest thoughts, but in a language we could not understand. Here we would have no idea what was going on inside them, despite the fact that what is going on inside them lies quite open to view. Ex hypothesi, the innermost thoughts of these people are clearly expressed only in a way we do not understand. this is important, they are not hidden, but are simply unknown to us. As Wittgenstein puts it, someone can hide his thoughts from me by expressing them in a language I do not understand. But where in this case is the mental thing which is hidden? They are not hidden, but are simply unknown to us. As Wittgenstein puts it, someone can hide his thoughts from me by expressing them in a language I do not understand. Do remember that, because that is so pertinent to the understanding of why consciousness per se actually doesn't make any sense at all. In fact, nothing is hidden, and all the talk of hiding does is to hinder attempts to understand the grammar of our concepts. To clarify that grammar, consider the claim that the inner is necessarily hidden. The natural way to support this claim is to point to cases where we genuinely do not know what someone is thinking. However, such cases are double-edged. For if the inner is sometimes hidden, this implies that sometimes it is not. In fact, the notion of knowledge clouds the issue. So what really matters is that the individual has a different relation to her own thoughts than to someone else's. And it's in context with this that the very, very difficult problem of consciousness per se evolves or spring into existence. And consciousness per se seems to be something beyond and on top of what we are already experiencing. Something apart from the emotions, dispositions, attitudes, beliefs, hopes, intentions and so forth. That there, on top of that, there should also be some sort of consciousness that doesn't have a corollary. It has no outward factors that decides or make it to be forceful and working. This consciousness becomes a sort of a counterpart to identity, a way of stopping entering into all these fantastic inner details of the inner, all those fascinating and contributing facets, aspects. We mentioned a few of them here. They're bound to be a lot more than those. But some have duration, others seem to be of the possibility of intermingling with others. And yet more are having aspects of direction. Another problem with consciousness was disclosed with the advent of quantum mechanics. And we think before that point, consciousness was something of an observer of things, looking at everything from a distance almost, seeing them, experiencing them, making a double copy as an engraving in the memory, which is an exact duplicate of what happened in a identical moment. And this absolute passivity got questioned when, in quantum mechanics, we noticed what sort of disposition, attitude do we have? will make for different outcomes. And all of a sudden it was much easier to see that there is a corollary and it's also the opposite. It's an interactivity. Intermingling, you could say, where they go into each other and thereby you get corollary and you get this attitude. Attitude towards and all this building complexity of structures could then, if the picture resides, it becomes stronger, it will subside and go into the same slot and be called consciousness somehow. And in that way it becomes significantly less participating, wouldn't be as possible to control it or direct it in any way. It would be too far away from us, out of our hands. I would say we would no longer inhabit our innerness to the same extent. We would be shielded from our own innerness. And that will of course also limit severely the outwardness, our possibility of understanding this complex world. I mentioned just recently Ian McGilchrist is pointing to the enormity, the absolutely humongous depth and complexity of the outer world. So consciousness could also be said to play a sort of Gemini-like role together with what comes to be, what springs into being. And to say that things evolve through their back history is similar to consciousness. They have a history. They evolved during geological time, if it's a rock, and then it got eroded, and so forth. That history is the binding history of the observing consciousness, all hiding. here is maybe helpful, indicative that this is about lying. As this is the last paragraph on page 172. As these points suggest, lying about the inner belongs to a different category from lying about the outer. To know that she is lying, the individual does not have to compare her utterance with her inner state. On the contrary, that she knows when she is lying follows from the grammatical point that her sincere utterances are necessarily correct. What makes the utterance false is its insincerity, and hence it is impossible for her to lie without knowing she is doing so. Here there is a temptation to construe the awareness that we are lying as a special kind of experience or feeling. But this is misguided, for if lying was a feeling, its connection with not telling the truth would be contingent, so that it might occasionally occur when we are telling the truth. In fact, the individual needs no basis to know she is lying. Furthermore, it is part of the concept of lying that it presupposes a motive and a situation. It is not like feeling, which may occur inexplicably and in various combinations. Rather, it belongs to a particular pattern of human behavior, and the features of that pattern distinguish it from others. The whole point of deception and non-deception is that they have different contexts and different consequences. Even if on some occasions the only difference is that the individual later confesses she was lying. The difference between lying and telling the truth is not that they involve different inner states, but that they have different manifestations. Like all other inner states, lying has outward criteria, and if it did not, it could be of no interest. And as you see here, it's the whole idea of a sort of epistemological excursion into one's innerness or one's mental sphere. Is mistaken. It's an outward gesture, if you like. And I really like, once more, this gesture by Piero Sraffa, who started this whole process, because it contains everything of this. Leaving nothing outside of it. It is perfect in its execution, and it can also be done in a myriad different ways. And its very acuity and exactness will decide the success of the doing. And that will, oddly enough, also be its corollary. could say starting to think that there is some contingency in these things, like in the understanding if you are lying or not, is incredibly knowledge destroying, or putting an unnecessary uncertainty where there is none at all. And of course, if there were some uncertainty, of course, yeah, I admit there should be also an awareness of that uncertainty. But in this case, there is no uncertainty at all. You know when you are lying. No need to check any innerness. It's a completely different act. And possibly it doesn't bear any clear relation to telling the truth. So the hiddenness, the idea of the black box of secludedness, also rids us of our absolute deserved certainty, our inheritance of knowing exactly, and leaves confusion and unnecessary deliberations. And it could be an ongoing search that would never end. And then we have some lines here about pretense, pain and pretense, to further strengthen the understanding that it is impossible not to know when you are feigning. And you just do it. You don't need to have an examination of your inner engravings, or what emotions you have for that instance. You just do it. And I would like to compare this to the collapse or the superposition, as it's called in quantum mechanics. Realizing that consciousness is not such a hidden feature of reality, or that the arche of the outer world isn't something absolutely hidden beyond direct possibility of understanding. Then we got this whole array of tendencies that undermine our knowledge. page 176. One way of underlining the particular nature of our language game is to contrast it with other possibilities. The tendency is to think that our game corresponds to reality and is the only possible one. In fact, it is conceivable that other people should play quite different games. For example, it would be possible for a group of people to reject the inner outer picture and treat all pain utterances as genuine. And I need to go into that example in 1718. Let's put a little marker here. But as you see, the hiddenness of the consciousness, or the hiddenness that we call the consciousness, will participate together with the perceived hiddenness of the outer world with their arche, and they construct this technological thinking process where they sort of enter into each other. But at the same time upholding distances, differences, making them stronger and stronger. It's a distance constructing way of seeing of the world. It obtains these differences and everything becomes disjunct and hidden. And hidden is not a property. The consciousness is not a thing. It's just the lack of entering into the huge enormous depth of complexities that actually resides there. And here I end. I say thank you very much for your enormous patience, and have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon, evening or night. Bye bye for now.